to make a more reasonable offer. But we'll see what the response is. I think this administration would like to get the war over with for political and economic reasons. They've been waiting for a more forthcoming offer from Tehran on nuclear issues. This provides a 15 to 20-day window in which to negotiate those nuclear details, which are complicated. It took the early JCPOA negotiators months and months back in 2015 to reach a deal. So it may take more time. But fundamentally, I think we need to understand this is Iran reacting to the chokehold that the U.S. has on the Strait and on the delivery of anything into Iran.
You know, John Meacham, I was reminded, and so too was Carter administration official Chris Matthews this past weekend, about how Iran has always used the bait and switch against American negotiators. We saw that as Witkoff and Kushner were about to fly out, the foreign minister left Islamabad. And Chris Matthews just reminded me that throughout the hostage crisis, the Iranians would make an offer, you'd go right up to the line, and then they would change the rules. Matthews saying most famously or infamously for the Carter White House and for Dr. Brzezinski, who was obviously involved in all of that, in the final lead up to Carter's election with Ronald Reagan, the Iranians let hope sort of fester in the White House that the hostages may be freed, and then at the last minute, they changed the conditions again, and Jimmy Carter knew that he was not going to have the hostages released before the elections. I'm just curious, just looking at that history, looking at where we are right now, does it seem that what we saw in '79 we're seeing yet again?
I think the analogy is probably more perilous than illuminating, if only because that was a clear case of, and Ignatius can check me on this, that was a clear case of an American national interest. I think it was 55, right? There were American hostages. They had been taken during the revolution. There was an act against American citizens, against American sovereignty. And there was very clear, not to be fancy about it, quid pro quo. It's let them go. This may be slightly unfair to the administration, but I don't think so. It is still largely fuzzy to a lot of us what exactly the president wants on this. We know he doesn't want a nuclear Iran, except for Iran. I don't think anyone does. But to me, the inability of the administration to articulate exactly what is on the table and what's off the table has created a level of uncertainty here that I continue to be surprised it hasn't affected the global markets more, which are supposed to hate uncertainty, but certainly seem not to be. The energy prices are going to be complicated. But it seems to me that what the administration needs to do is tell us, the American people, what this is all about. And we still need a clear explanation of what's unfolding.
Well, and the conditions for a settlement have changed repeatedly. At first we heard about regime change, then we heard about no nuclear Iran. But and now, of course, the Strait's being open. But make no mistake of it, from the very start, even with last year's bombing attack of Iran, it all centered around a nuclear-free Iran. So talks from the Iranians suggesting that we'll open the Straits and then let's talk about the nukes later. Again, that based on what we can grasp of what the administration's goals are in Iran, that should be a non-starter, especially if you listen to what Pete Hegseth said last week.
Right, exactly. So still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to talk. 25 past the hour, Iran's foreign minister is in Russia today as part of an intensive diplomatic shuttle after he stopped in Amman following his trip to Pakistan. Russian state media reports he will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin just days after President Trump called off the negotiations that were supposed to take place on Saturday. We'll follow that. The Iran-Russia meeting comes following a gathering of EU leaders in Cyprus last week to discuss the conflict in the Middle East as well as Ukraine. The European Union approved a $105 billion loan for Ukraine as Russia's full-scale war continues. On the sidelines of the gathering, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky discussed the importance of producing anti-ballistic missiles domestically.
We will try to build our Ukrainian and a system of anti-ballistic system. We need it, and of course we will share with all the partners without any questions, and because we need, all of us, we need it, and not only to create the system, to create such capabilities which can produce more. Now, you know that the United States produces about 60, maybe 65 missiles per month, PAC-3 anti-ballistic missiles. It's nothing. During the first day of attack on Middle East, you know that they used the volume of 2 years production of such missiles during 24 hours. So we need our European independent, strong system, and we will build it.
David Ignatius, the world is changing. Europe is changing.
Wow.
You look at what Ukraine has done in this war. They have revolutionized warfare in a way that is simply extraordinary and has held Russia at bay now for years. But you take that reality, you take the reality that Europe no longer looking to America, a $105 billion loan, and all of this comes at the same time that Vladimir Putin is facing absolute exhaustion in Russia from this war. The million-plus casualties there, the economy sinking. He seems to be, despite what the administration loves to say, Vladimir Putin seems to be in his weakest position yet.
Joe, I just got back from Ukraine this weekend. I was there last week, and the feeling there was oddly uplifting. This is a place where the good guys are actually winning, or at least holding their own. The Ukrainian mastery of drone technology is extraordinary, and I sat in on many meetings in which they were trying to sell Europeans, their new European partners, on the both offensive and defensive anti-drone systems that they're building. Their innovation cycles are unbelievable. I met people who were just back from the front, who make some of this technology, who were heading to their factories to incorporate what they'd just learned in the last week, to roll over the innovation cycle and get new stuff out. They'll change it again in another month. And the other thing I goes to your point, Joe, is Europeans really are over this expectation that they're going to get something from Donald Trump. They've decided, facing a threatening Russia, they're going to have to do it themselves. They say that out loud. There was a palpable anger in Kyiv among Europeans at the United States. Its refusal to help Ukraine in the way that it used to, and it's pulling back from NATO at the very time Europeans feel most threatened. So it was a really interesting snapshot, I think, of the world that we're heading into, where you have a much more European NATO. Europeans just kind of said, okay, let's just deal with it. That Donald Trump's America is going to be different. We're going to have to do it on our own.
Well, I mean, he's openly hostile to Zelensky. John Meacham, he's been openly hostile. Even statements that he made this past weekend, he talked about how we've helped the Ukrainians too much. It goes on and on. I mean,
they're not grateful enough.
Time and time again, they have lied about Ukraine. Time and time again, they have lied about Russia's strength. Time and time again, the administration has done everything they can seem to do to help Vladimir Putin get a deal that he could never win on the battlefield. So just let's look at the grand historical scope of this. In 1917, the United States goes and fights along with our European allies to win the First World War. In 1941, we go into 41, we go in, and along with Europe, we win the Second World War. You look at NATO coming to our defense after 9/11. Only time Article 5 is invoked. We've had an extraordinary relationship with our European allies. Donald Trump seems hell-bent to break off the strongest alliance in American history. Where does this put us now that Europe and the Ukrainians have finally given up on a president who seems obsessed on being on the right side of Vladimir Putin instead of Western civilization?
Well, the anti-NATO push of the last 10 years is a revivification of the Republican, conservative, largely Midwestern push against the projection of force at the beginning of the Cold War. Robert Taft of Ohio. Actually, Taft might have been president of the United States in 1952 if he had agreed to a proposal that Dwight Eisenhower made. Eisenhower was on his way to become the first Supreme Commander. He asked for a meeting with Taft, who's the front runner for the Republican nomination. Eisenhower says, look, I'm going to issue a Sherman-esque statement. I won't run ever. All you need to do is agree to collective security as a principle. Taft says no. Why was Truman, why was Eisenhower, why were they so devoted to this idea of collective security? I think not least because, as you just said, we had just fought a Second World War to try to secure the capacities of democratic capitalism, to try to secure a world that was going to be less likely to have a World War III. And it worked, remarkably so. The pushback is this sense, it's an ancient American sense, that somehow or another the oceans are going to save us. Right, we're too far away. It's Fortress America. Herbert Hoover said that we should be a Fortress America. We shouldn't be involved in this old world. We always get taken. See if any of this sounds familiar. We're always getting ripped off. They're always taking advantage of us, and so we are not going to help these smaller countries that are parasitically taking American wealth and strength. And basically, where we are is the most successful alliance, arguably in American history, which is vital for what I think, and Ignatius will check me on this. I think one way of looking at where we are, which links both Iran and Ukraine in our conversation, is we're in this kind of pre-1914 period of great power competition, seeking natural resources, seeking a position in a multipolar world with a nuclear overlay. So it's not a precise analogy to pre-1914, but it is also with the capacity to have massive destruction. And so it's particularly complicated.
Yep. Yeah, and how fascinating that you bring up Herbert Hoover, the man responsible for the Great Depression because of high tariffs, talking about Fortress America, and how absolutely extraordinary, Mika, that you would have isolationists, American firsters, even in the early 1950s, wanting to have Fortress America when you had Stalin, who had his eyes on Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and yes, Western Europe. It's the same thing that's happening now. If Ukraine falls, the Balkans are next. Poland is next. Europeans understand this.
Yeah.
And actually, people with half a brain understand it in America. They understand Putin will not stop with Ukraine. And yet, again, it seems so many out there want to just provide aid and comfort.
Yeah.
To to Putin.
And this is happening right now. It's not a what if. Joining us now, U.S. national editor and columnist at the Financial Times, Ed Luce. I know we're going to be talking about your piece on Charles's visit, King Charles, but I do want to ask you about this, especially these comments by Volodymyr Zelensky. That they're very pointed and open, and describing what is a shift in allegiances and alliances, and what the consequences not may be, but will be.
Yeah, I think David was absolutely bang on in saying that the Ukrainians have understood that, they haven't got a cent of new money from the United States since Donald Trump was re-inaugurated 15 months ago, and they're not expecting any money. They still do depend on a lot of things from the United States, intelligence sharing, targeting information, and until the Iran war, some Patriot defense batteries that have been paid for by the Biden administration. But essentially, they know it's done. Their future is Europe. And the fact that Orban was defeated a couple of weeks ago, Orban in Hungary, he had been blocking that $105 billion loan, which isn't really a loan, by the way, it's a grant. Ukraine would only repay it if Russia paid reparations to Ukraine for the war. So basically, they've got this because Orban's out the way, they've now got this money from Europe that's going to enable them to fight on and to keep innovating in this extraordinary way that David described. They are the world's most innovative military. And to such an extent that the demand for Ukrainian products in the Gulf to help protect the UAE, Qatar, and other countries is huge. And they're the only country that can really supply it. So Europe has, I think, digested what Zelensky has digested, which is they've got to plan as though America is not coming back. Europe has to build up its own sort of defense autonomy. It's really been a French line for decades, but now everybody sounds like Charles de Gaulle in Europe nowadays, including the British. And you've got people like Mark Carney of Canada asking if they can join. So this is a major, major shift. It's unfortunate that it's happening. It really is to be regretted, but it is reality. And Europe, I think, is finally woken up to this reality.
So speaking of the British, Ed Luce, the king is coming to town. We know President Trump is a fan of the monarchy. He says so repeatedly, and he says he likes King Charles quite a bit. The king in D.C. It's a 4-day visit, including a state dinner tomorrow. Trump spends a lot of time with him in coming days. The president did acknowledge that U.S. relations with the U.K. strained